So you want to write a story or have an idea that's just not long enough for a novel story? Well, today I'm talking all things short story on this episode of Spooky Writes. So let's head into the storm. Okay, right. Hello, writers. Welcome to Spooky Writes. My name's Kamal Onor. I'm a short story author, and today I'm giving you my top tricks and hacks to make sure that your work can get to a publishable quality. So why short stories? Because I firmly believe that short stories are the best type of story to be writing, especially when you're beginning your journey as an author, because so many people are so hyper-focused on novels, but short stories are going to do so much more for you, and I've talked a lot about this on this channel. So if you like this type of content, make sure to hit like, subscribe. I post videos Mondays and Fridays and then shorts between those days. So make sure that you ring that notification bell, lets you know whenever I post a video. Today, short stories, in my opinion, short stories are the king of what you need to be writing and what you need to be focusing on, especially early in your journey as an author, because early in your journey as an author, you're not going to have your voice. You're going to struggle with a lot of the minute scenes. And if you're able to turn your ideas into short stories, this is going to help you improve so much quicker than working on a big, lengthy novel will. Because the idea is that by focusing on a short story, you can try so many different things within a much shorter period of time. You can try out different characters. You can try out different story arcs. You can try out different settings. You can write a science fiction short story instead of spending 100,000 plus words on a science fiction novel. You can write a science fiction short story. You can try writing a horror short story. You can try writing a romance short story. There's so much opportunity for playing around and experimenting with a short story, which is why short stories should be the bread and butter of what you are writing during your writing journey. And this is going to help you immensely, especially when you get to the workshop process. There were so many times when I remember being in school working with individuals who were so hyper fixated on the idea of that they were working on a novel that they would bring novel excerpts to workshops. And it's always difficult. I've always found it's incredibly difficult to workshop novel excerpts because you're looking at a section of a story. You're looking at a fragmented piece of something that is a greater whole. And often when you give feedback to authors about novel excerpts, the author will often talk about how they have that planned, or it's going to be a little further on into the story. This scene is already going to occur. And I think it's great to workshop novels, but starting out your writing journey, you need to be focused on short stories, because short stories are going to help you develop your voice. They're going to help you to strengthen your abilities, because short stories are so hyper-focused on the more minute scenes. You need to be able to write a scene extremely well before you can start worrying about novels. Novels are big, hunking Goliaths. They're these massive undertakings, and short stories are also difficult to write. But short stories are another beast entirely. So short stories, you have to be writing short stories. Short stories are going to help you to develop your voice. They're going to help you to develop your craft. It's not just there are so many publications that you can submit your work to that are looking for short stories. And short stories are typically defined as being anywhere from over 1,000 words to kind of maxing out around 7,500 words or so. Some publications are different, so you always want to make sure that you are looking at the submission guidelines for each magazine. Remember, if you don't take the time to read the submission guidelines, why should the editor take any time to read your piece? There's also no reason why your short stories can't eventually become longer pieces, why they can't eventually grow up to become novellas or novels. And and the more short stories that you write, the more confident you will become in your ability as an author, because so many people, and myself included, I remember when I first started writing, I had no confidence in my ability to write. I would always have to bring my work to someone else and say, "What do you think of this? What do you think of this? Please read this and tell me that this is good." And I had no confidence in my own ability as an author. And you have to develop your confidence as an author by writing a lot of stuff. The more short stories that you work on, the faster you're going to be able to identify what good work is and what bad work is. And early on, you're going to write a lot of you're going to write a lot of awful, bad writing. And it's okay. It just has to get out of you. You have to get the Hollywoodized action heroes out of your head, because these are characters that don't serve a great purpose within literature. And short stories are not trying to capture the same thing that novels are trying to capture. They're not trying to capture the same character progression, the same character arc. Short stories need to be much tighter. They need to be much more heavily focused. I do find sort of a sweet spot for short stories. At least what I try and aim for is anywhere from about 2,000 words to around 3,000 words. But again, you want to make sure that your story is falling into the word requirement length for the publication that you are looking to submit. Some magazines will only accept stories that are under 2,000 words. Some might say they want stories that start at around 4,000 or 5,000 words. And so you just need to be very cognizant of the publication that you are submitting your work to. Again, if you submit your work and it's just slightly over, many cases editors will be lenient with this. But if they say that this is a hard cutoff, they will not read your work. If they say word count has to be 5,000 to 7,000 words and you submit a 4,500 word story, that's not going to meet their requirement. They're not going to read it. So just be aware of all that. Understanding that short stories need to be concise. They need to be hyper-focused. And a great trick to making sure your story is hyper-focused is limiting the number of protagonists. Typically, I like to have short stories with maybe one protagonist, maybe a group of protagonists, but they're seen as more of a group. It might be focusing on a relationship between one or two characters, but you don't want to have a big sprawling cast of protagonists. You don't want to have a Lord of the Rings style protagonist list for your short story. You don't want to have characters like Frodo, Bilbo. There's far too many characters to be focused on in a short story. You want to be hyper-focused. You want to have your main protagonist, and you want to put that protagonist into a situation that's going to force him or her to change. So where do you start with a short story? Is it different from that of the way you would start a novel? Is it different from the way that you might start a flash piece or a novella? How do you start a short story? Well, like I've been talking about, short stories have to be hyper-focused. So you ideally want to start with your inciting incident. And an inciting incident is going to be the gun that goes off. It's going to be a ghost appearing, or it's going to even be a hard breakup. It's going to be something that sets the story into motion. And typically in a short story, you want this to be something that is going to force your protagonist to change in some way. Whether ideally you want your character to be forced to change in some way against his or her will. And so given our example of maybe a ghost appears and suddenly we're now asking ourselves, does this protagonist recognize the ghost? Is it someone that the protagonist knows? Why is the protagonist being haunted? And you want to focus in on how your protagonist is reacting to the situation. And you want to make sure that this is the focal point of your story, because stories are all about showing empathy. It's all about putting the reader in the mind of someone similar but yet unfamiliar to them as a reader. And so you want your character to behave in a way that would be appropriate. So you don't want your protagonist to be like, "Oh my God, a ghost. Hi, friend." You want your character to be fearful, and then we want to see that character react in a way that's believable. And then we want to we want to see consequences. We want to see the human reaction to seeing a ghost, and you want to write some kind of connection, some tie-in with perhaps the ghost appearing, or the gun that goes off, or the harsh breakup. And how does this force that character to change? How does this force that character to reevaluate his or her own existence? Does the appearance of a ghost suddenly change our protagonist thinking about life and death? And then you just have to continue to ask yourself what if questions. Continue to ask yourself, what is my character going to do? How is my character behaving based off of the situation that I've put in front of him or her? Is my character going to suddenly go on a quest to try and remove the ghost from the house that they've recently moved into? Or is the character going to try and befriend that ghost? Is the ghost going to start entering this main character's dream and show him or her images of a grave? And slowly the character has to unravel and piece together what the ghost is trying to tell our protagonist to do, and what the ghost is trying to send a message to our protagonist. And we need to have a character who is interesting. We don't want to have a character who is just blasé. Short stories need to be focused on change. They need to be focused on an evolution of a character. If we have a short story where a character starts at here and continues and ends here, there needs to be the character needs to be changed in some way. You can't have a character start off at home and then they end at home without there being any evolution, without there being any change, because we want to, as readers, we want to see this character change. We want to see this character evolve. We want to see this character be forced into uncomfortable situations, and then we want to see how that character reacts to that situation. So this is what you need to be focusing in on short stories, and these are some hacks. And so just like that, just by asking yourself, what is my character's reaction to the situation that I have given him or her, you have yourself a short story, and you can then start to edit. You can then start to tweak it and change it around as you want. There are many times where I've completely changed my short stories around. There are times when I've cut characters out entirely, where I've had to focus more on where the story is progressing naturally. Maybe I start off with a character walking in the woods, and then the character hears a voice, and then I start to write more. And the more writing that I do, I start to learn more about my protagonist. I start to learn why my character is in the woods. I start to learn about his or her background, and this will lead me down a bread trail towards learning more about my protagonist. And the more that you know about your protagonist, the better you will be able to write his or her own reaction to the events that you are putting in front of him or her. And we want to see obstacles. We want to see change. And this is what short stories need to be focused on. Short stories need to be focused on a character unwillingly changing throughout the course of 10, 15, 20 pages. Again, my sweet spot for short stories tends to be around 2,000 to 3,000 words. If you go way overboard, it's going to be hard to find. It's going to be difficult to find a market suitable for a 15,000 word short story. But again, your short stories can evolve over time. If you find that you are writing very long short stories, you might want to try and further elaborate on maybe give your character more obstacles and lengthen that process of his or her own change. And then you might have a novella on your hand, or even a novel. So again, you want to be writing short stories. You want to be hyper focused on the character's evolution and the character's progression. Think about what separates your protagonist from everyone else? What makes him or her interesting in the way that they react to the situation to the situation that you have presented to them, to the situation that you have put them into, the obstacles that you put in front of him or her. Again, going back to our ghost situation, does the ghost enter your protagonist's dreams, and the protagonist starts seeing a grave, and he grabs a shovel and goes off to find this unmarked grave, and he starts digging and he's digging and he's digging, and then maybe the story ends with this note of the character at the end of his own grave that he has unknowingly dug. And I will be doing a video specifically talking about how to start short stories. That'll be coming out very soon. So make sure you hit like, subscribe. It means a lot. Help this channel grow. Share it with your writing friends. And as always, keep it spooky.